The first time I introduced Tadeusz Kościuszko to someone in the United States was November 2017. The Polish war hero was standing on a tall pedestal in Lafayette Park, regal and dashing. Lafayette Park is a public park located directly north of the White House. Each of the park's four corners stand statues commemorating noteworthy Europeans who aided American forces during the American Revolution. 2 Frenchmen, 1 German, and 1 Pole, Tadeusz Kościuszko. The great hero was dressed in the uniform of an American general and held drawings of the West Point garrison defenses in one hand. Beneath the pedestal stood smaller statues of him, protecting young soldiers during significant Polish and American battles. In each, his sword was drawn in a protective gesture. There are many people around his monument, several of them sitting on the base and not really taking notice of the monument itself. My husband, a Polish historian, and I pondered the situation, wondering why so many people lingered around this particular statue when we noticed very few at the other 3. A few moments later, we had the answer. The monument was next to a bus stop and people were simply waiting for their transportation. After the crowd boarded the bus, 2 men remained. Unlike the bus travelers' casual regard, they seemed really interested in the monument itself. The men were African American, likely father and son. I asked them if they knew anything about the monuments or the man that it memorialized. They didn't, and so I introduced them to Tadeusz Kościuszko. My husband gave them a brief history of his role as the Polish hero of the American Revolution. Known and respected by George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and befriended by Thomas Jefferson, Kościuszko is recognized as one of the most important figures in America's victory over the British in 1783. However, while numerous monuments and other memorials pay tribute to the Polish hero across the United States, outside of Polonia, he is virtually unknown. The men listened politely as the historians spoke. They seemed fairly interested, but not entranced. After all, the Capitol has plenty of statues featuring dead war heroes from long ago. Then I took over. I told the men about Tadeusz Kościuszko's lifelong dedication to the freedom and liberty of all peoples, from the peasants in his Polish homeland to the African and Native Americans in the United States. Now the men were really paying attention. This aspect of Kościuszko's life is extremely important for me. As an African American, I have a somewhat complicated relationship with my country's history. Ancestors on my father's side were slaves. My great-grandmother Josephine, a beautiful dark-skinned African American with bright blue eyes, told my father's stories that were handed down by previous generations, horrible stories that live on through me. Slavery and its consequences continue to affect the lives of African Americans. Sometimes the effects are clear to see, sometimes they are invisible, but they are always there. Then I recalled the story of Kościuszko's American will. In May 1798, just before leaving the United States for the final time, Kościuszko asked his good friend Thomas Jefferson to create, and after his death, act as executor for the money that he was rewarded for his military service to the United States during the American Revolutionary War. It was, in fact, the largest amount of money Kościuszko had ever earned, and he wanted it to be used to liberate Black slaves and educate them so they could live free and fruitful lives. Jefferson drafted the will and agreed to serve as its executor. However, in 1819, 2 years after his death, Jefferson refused to serve as executor, saying he was too old. Later, in the mid-1850s, the will was dismissed by the Supreme Court, and Kościuszko's money was sent to his relatives in Poland. The 2 African Americans we met at Kościuszko's monument seemed stunned, listening intently to every word. When we finished talking, the older man said, "Wow, I had no idea." He added, "You know, after all this time, we African Americans still haven't been liberated. After all this time, we have only been emancipated." My husband looked at him sadly, and I put my hand on his shoulder. Then we took pictures of the 2 men and Kościuszko, a man who became an ally for them in their continuing quest for liberation. We shook hands and they walked away. Then I sat by a statue of Kościuszko on the base of his monument, and as he helped a young soldier, I thanked him for trying to help me. Tadeusz Kościuszko was a man of great intellect and empathy, a man who showed courage and humility throughout his life, a man we should all try to emulate during times of peace as well as conflict. He was, as Thomas Jefferson described him, as pure a son of liberty as I have ever known.